much better. I hope so. Let me see. Thanks very much for mentioning that. All right. So quick recap. Today we talk about biochar, the technology itself, current state of the market, and can it really save the entire climate puzzle that we're trying to fix right now. I hope my sound is now working. Now it works. Thanks very much for the thumbs up. Big help here. So we're discussing biochar as a project type, and we quickly summarized that biochar itself is a nature-based carbon removal project because we let nature do the work through photosynthesis and store the carbon inside a plant or inside a bush or grass. And since this carbon has already been stored in a biological product, we don't need to do the difficult task here. But what usually happens, let's say in agriculture, in a nut shell where the CO2 is stored, the nut, of course, goes into the supermarket, but the shell itself stored carbon as well. And this carbon is not very stable. If we put it on a compost, it decomposes, or if we burn it off, it goes up into the air again. So what humans can do is they can take this CO2, which is already stored in the bio-waste, and put it into a pyrolysis machine or burn it off manually to then make it very stable. And as I showed earlier, it looks like this at the end of the day. Black char, which is stable carbon up to 100 years or 1,000 years even, which is then applied to agricultural land in the top layer of the fields, where it increases water retention drastically. So this is very helpful in regions where there's very little rainfall and we need to irrigate a lot by hand or manually, or where there's very strong rains and the water usually would go down to the groundwater quite quickly, but through the char, it's retained in the top layer of the soil for much longer, and the plants can draw from it when they need it. So there's two types of production process of char. One is the artisan. It's a thousands and thousands of year-old technique where we dig a pit or take a metal kilt and put the bio-waste in, and we need to burn it off to char. But we need to make sure that it's done in a very appropriate manner where there is no smoke and therefore no emissions go back up, but the material is turned into char. The second way is we take the bio-waste and put it actually into an industrial machine. It can be a containerized machine, it can be a big setup where the bio-waste goes in. It's burned at 500, 600 degrees Celsius with no oxygen in the tank, and therefore the char comes out at the end of the production process. So these are the two types: artisan, traditional, thousands and thousands year old practice, or the industrial way with the machine. These are the two technologies we see currently. Then the biggest question usually around the production is where's all the bio-waste coming from? So these can be agricultural waste material from crop stalks, can be husk, can be shells, can be straws. Can also be forest and landscaping residues like wood chips, bushes that being trimmed, grass, bark, sawdust, and so on. Or it can be dedicatedly grown biomaterial, which is only there for the purpose of later using it to char it off and remove carbon. One very important factor in the entire process is the moisture level. So if I produce biochar, I need to really control the moisture of the bio-waste before it comes in to avoid low quality char, but also avoid a lot of emissions. A good rule of thumb is below 20 or below 15% moisture level before the material goes into the production process. And then the end of the day, I mentioned this earlier, there's currently two protocols out there where the char is certified as minimum 100 years carbon storage or minimum 1,000 years carbon storage. That means it depends a little bit on the protocol, how the char was produced and the certifier behind it. Although there's science that this char is actually much longer durable, even thousands and thousands of years, but the certifiers for now took a more conservative approach to put it to 100 or 1,000 years. But this is already a very, very long time frame, 1,000 years, to lock up your carbon. Now we have the carbon stored in the char, and I mentioned one application earlier was in agriculture, where it goes back into the field. But there's also other applications. An alternative is, for example, that it's added to feed for livestock, because it helps, for example, cows for digestion. And then later with the manure, it goes back into the ground and is then dug in, and therefore the carbon is removed permanently. It just takes a different route first to have multiple beneficial effects. Before we can answer if this is the perfect solution to save our climate, we need to understand where we are today in terms of the market. So if we look into the two project types, artisan and industrial, we see that the early projects have been strongly focusing on artisan production, and we now see more and more industrial type projects coming to the market. But still, I would say today it's 50-50 new projects between artisan and industrial that are going live. In terms of regions, where are all these projects located? The artisan projects are usually located in the global south. This is due to the decentralized farming structures, meaning in the global south, there is usually very smallhold farmers as a main concept of farming. So a family or family collective farms where they live instead of very industrialized farming. This means the artisan way of doing it in a traditional, in a pit that you have on your own facility, is very cost efficient and can be done at all these local farms. In terms of industrial facilities, we saw that more of them are located currently in the global north, but this is strongly growing also in the global south these days, where people have very great invention around mobile units or very small units which can be placed at all these different farms. So there's a lot of advancement in an industrial type project or project type in both the global north and the global south. In terms of volumes and how many projects actually exist, there's around about 100 projects currently live and in the starting phase at this point. I would say they're rather mixed in terms of countries. So we have everything from North America, South America, Europe, in Africa, in India, and all the way to the Southeast Asian regions. So it's really mixed, which is very good that it can be then used for corporates in the same host country where the project is based. The total volumes we see today are around about 1,000 tons to 10,000 tons per project. Some of them will remain rather small, around about that size in the long term, because it's just very local project. But some others are scaling up to even 500,000 or 1 million tons of CO2 removed per year per project. These are typically the industrial-sized facilities that can go to that level. As of today, the majority of volume still lies in the global south. So if you're interested in projects in Europe, for example, availability is very limited and might be so for the next 2 to 3 years still, unless there's more projects coming to the market. If there's any questions, please again use the chat. Happy to answer anything comes to mind. The last topic before we go into the third chapter is the pricing. So pricing is currently around about 120, 140 euros per ton on an entire market average. And this can be split up into the artisan project types in the global south, where project pricings are around 90 euros per ton. And it goes up to industrial project types in the global north to around about 250 euros. So that's a little bit the two ranges that we see in the market. And these prices are for current credits if a corporate wants to do a long-term agreement, several years for very large volumes, of course, pricing can come down quite significantly. And then as a third topic, and maybe last one, is how big is the market and how much can it grow? So biochar is currently the biggest project type of the long-term carbon removal projects. And the IPCC, which is a climate committee, guessed or estimated its growth potential to round about 2 gigatons plus minus in the long term, which is round about 20% of the puzzle that we're trying to solve for the 10 gigatons of carbon removal annually by 2050. So it has a very meaningful share of the puzzle, but due to the biomass constraint, it will not necessarily solve the entire puzzle. There's also a question around, maybe I'll tackle this one now. Yeah, labor costs, and if that's a factor. So absolutely, labor cost is a big factor in the production process itself, especially in artisan, where you don't have a machine or anything as such. And if you operate a decentralized project of an artisan project, for example, a very cost-intensive or one element to consider is also the verification process. You need to send someone to the sites to make sure when the process or the project takes place, the charring takes place and the sequestration takes place, that you monitor this very closely and have a verifier there or some sort of digital MRV process in place for the very decentralized projects. In the global north, we have different labor costs, but if the project is more industrialized, we have scale effects. But absolutely, it really depends on the project type and the scale of the project, how costs come together. Perfect. Maybe quickly summarizing it, there's two types of biochar production processes. There's the artisan, and then there's the industrial or the tech-based approach. Nowadays, projects take place in the global north and in the global south, where the global south still holds the majority of volumes, and the global north is still a bit lacking behind that. And it can be certified for over 100 years or over 1,000 years permanence. And yes, it has a meaningful potential to solve 20% of the carbon removal puzzle, but not all of it. Happy to take any other questions or topics you want to talk about in the last couple of minutes. Perfect. If there's no questions, thanks very much for dialing in, and sorry again for the microphone hiccup at the start. I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday and see you next time. Thank you.